All right, greetings, IB Juniors. I'm sorry I'm not there with you today. I'm ill, but I do need us to move forward with the comparative study. We have to move on to the next portion of the study, which is the analysis and evaluation of cultural context and significance. So I'm going to go through that with you in this slideshow. Of course, if I were with you, I'd be throwing Tootsie Pops and Tootsie Rolls at you, but we're not together, so we'll forge on this way. So let's get right into it. Sorry, let me click here. There we go. So the reason that IB is asking you to do this is because of this. Fine art is not created in a vacuum. It's a representation of an artist's interaction with the world. What is happening in the world impacts what they produce and what it looks like and what it says. And this Norman Rockwell is a pretty good example of that. I don't think I need to explain it. You can see the statement he's making, affected by the world around him. So what exactly is cultural context? So I really want to break this down to you to give you tools and sort of pathways into doing this. So the first thing you need to know is that you're going to focus on looking outside the work. Don't look at the objects and the images inside the work, but look outside. What are the conditions around the artist that had an impact on the creation of a work of art? And approaching it, the best way to do is to use these three categories. If you do this, you're really on track. You want to ask, what's happening in the artist world? What's happening in the art world? And what's happening in the wider world? So let me break those down for you one at a time. So what is happening in the artist world? Here are questions for you. You can go to this presentation and look at these questions, and if you look for answers to these questions and you put them on your slide, you are definitely attending to the cultural significance of a work. Where are they living when they created the piece? Is this where they were born? How do they feel about their surroundings? What are their financial circumstances? Are they formally trained? Is this early or late in their career? This is important. If you look at an early Picasso, you'd be surprised. It's highly realistic. So it's very important, like, where is this in their career? What's their economic status? What's their relationship to the subject? What other artists in the world have influenced them? And how successful were they? And can you find quotes from the artist that shed light on their view of the world? Okay, let's move on to the next one. What's happening in the art world? And those questions would be more aligned with things like, what movement or genre is the artist a part of? What does this movement tend to look like? What does the work look like, or what is it about? What underpins the movement? What came before? What came after? How did critics and audiences respond to the work at the time? And how significant is the work today? You'll see later in the slideshow that you really do have to address today with some very famous works of art. And can you find a quote from an art critic or a curator that's looked at and studied this work? Okay, finally, what's happening in the wider world? Has there been a war? Is there political unrest? What are the big issues or events of the time? What are the important socioeconomic factors? Is the artist responding to these events and situations? Are there religious circumstances at play? The incorrect spelling of there, just caught that. Is there evidence of any of the above in the artwork? And can you find a quote from a curator or a critic? So when you're doing your research, you need to find things that are important and relative to the work you are studying. And not everything will be. So strive to make these connections and find research that is relevant and valuable around the actual work. Right? An artist has a body of work. So again, if you were looking at one of Picasso's abstract portraits, but you are talking about what was going on in his early life when he was doing realism, you're no longer surrounding and keeping within the parameters of the abstract portrait that you're studying, right? So let's look at some works so you can see how you'd start. So first I want to draw your attention to the upper right. this is finding areas that are most relevant. This is not a sample of a finished context slide. I say that because students often get to this and go, oh, this is how it should look. No, we're just focusing on what I thought would be most relevant. So the first thing is, if you have a self-portrait, you're going to want to begin with what's happening in the artist's world. They're painting themselves. So let's look at what's going on with them. So let's look at his life and training. Is this piece early or late in his career? Is there a cultural expression of the time in the work? What's his socioeconomic status? How did he feel about the work he lived in? And here's a little bit of information just to give you a taste of what might go on this slide in regards to what's happening in the artist's world. Albrecht Dürer's father was a goldsmith, and he received training in his workshop as a very young boy. Art historian Marcel Briand believes that the self-portrait marks a farewell to his irresponsible youth, the acclaim he received during his visit to Italy, and his general apprehension as the 15th century came to an end and dark clouds hung over the Germanic states. In the depiction, Dürer elevates himself to the social position he believes suited to an artist of his ability. So he's actually elevating himself, and I read about that, and that's what went into this little piece of information on my cultural context slide. Now, as a researcher, the dark clouds that hung over the Germanic states, I said, there's what's going on in the larger world. Let me go look at that, right? So sometimes you're looking at one aspect, and you get little hints as to other things that are going on that can direct your research. So then I would go in to look at events occurring around the time of production. What was happening in the German states? Now, I'm not going to go into that because I really just want to show you how to get started. And then, of course, your research will lead you in different directions depending upon your work. Let's look at another one. So, okay. The Sistine Chapel. You can't get more famous than this, right? So first of all, this was a commission. So the patronage of the work and who paid for it and why is important. Pope Julius II paid Michelangelo for the Sistine Chapel after being convinced to do so by artists Raphael and Bramante, who wanted to see the remarkable young sculptor fail at this massive painting project. I found that tidbit fascinating. But the Pope was an extravagant patron who wanted to forever leave his mark on the Catholic Church, and he believed Michelangelo would help him do that. So this Pope had a huge ego, and he wanted to go down in history as the one who commissioned a great work. And by the way, he did, right? So that's the patronage. That's an important piece of cultural context. This is why was the piece made, all right? Now, the audience impact now and then. This piece, you can't look at a famous piece like this and not talk about the history of its impact. So, first of all, the artist Giorgio Vasari, writing 40 years later, just 40 years after it was made, quote, "It was such as to make everyone astonished and dumb." Dumb meaning mute, unable to speak, not stupid. The whole world came running when the vault was revealed, and the sight of it was enough to reduce them to a stunned silence. Now that's a quote. I found this written in an article by the last name of Field. That's all you need. I don't remember his first name, and the year that it was written, right? That's an in-text citation. If you quote somebody right on your slide, you need to do this, okay? You need to do an citation. And then, of course, have that also in your bibliography, more fleshed out. And then today, over 5 million people visit the chapel every year. That's significant cultural context. This piece is still having an impact on the culture, not only of Rome or of Italy or of Europe, but the world, because people come from all over the world to view the piece. Okay, moving over to the right side of the slide, blue caption, what movement was this a part of? Definitely important, right? So the High Renaissance is a period generally considered to have spanned the decades between 1490 and 1830, informed by the aesthetic ideals of ancient Greek and Roman civilizations. The artists of the High Renaissance developed the linear perspective, naturalistic forms, and the use of light that had been introduced by their forerunners. At the heart of their work was beauty, more specifically the heavenly beauty associated with the divine. So that's a really loaded, juicy entry for cultural context. It talks about what came before, it talks about what influenced it, it talked about what it's made up of, and it talks a little bit about what motivated it, which was religion. In the middle is this fun little tidbit that I learned quite a while ago. Sorry, the type is small. But so this bishop, Biagio, a bishop and a Vatican official, harassed Michelangelo while he was painting the chapel, and he complained that the nudity was more befitting a bathhouse, not a chapel. And so Michelangelo painted him, I see typos, forgive me, painted him on the front wall of the chapel as Minos, I think it's pronounced, which is the judge of the underworld, basically hell. And he painted him with donkey ears and a snake biting his penis because he was so freaked out about the nudity. This guy, stop. This bishop complained bitterly to the Pope and asked that it be painted over. And the Pope was like, sorry, dude, you hassled this great artist. You got to live with this. Very interesting little tidbit and could be included in cultural context. It was how this work was received by those within the Vatican itself. Okay, on we go. Well, we're getting there. So here's another piece. Like, you look at this work. Now, I have a lot of knowledge of art history, so I know the significance of this piece. But you, as a young artist, you may have loved this work and have chosen it, but you may not understand or know why is this piece a big deal, right? It looks like 3 or 4 colors. It's on a canvas. Like, why is this? There doesn't appear to be a lot of technique. So the first question I would say when looking at work like this is I would begin with, what movement was this artist a part of? So that would be that second question. What was going on in the art world? Remember, artist world, art world, greater world. With this piece, I'd start with the art world. Abstract expressionism is the term applied to a form of abstract art developed by a group of painters such as Jackson Pollock, Willem de Kooning, and Mark Rothko. They were mostly based in New York City and also became known as the New York School. The name evokes their aim to make art that, while abstract, was also expressive and emotional in its effect. They were inspired by the idea that art should come from the unconscious mind, and the work was characterized by gestural brushstrokes or mark making and the impression of spontaneity. So some of those other questions, again, I don't want these slides to be too dense or this presentation to be too much longer, so I just throw some questions out. What was his lasting impact on the art world? Also, at what point in his career was this painted and what came before? And how did art critics and audiences respond to the artwork at the time? So known for their bold color fields, that's what this is, a colored field painting, and emotional intensity, Rothko's paintings are often described as having a profound impact on viewers, eliciting feelings of transcendence, of calm, of introspective, and even of being compared to religious experiences. And you really have to experience the painting. So up in the upper right, you see people standing in front of the work to truly appreciate this idea that it might be a transcendent experience to stand in front of one of these works. They really wanted you to stand close enough so that you didn't see easily the parameters of the edges of the canvas. They wanted you immersed in those colors and in those fields of color. So Rothko's paintings were filled with depth and bursting with ideas while being heavily inspired by philosophy and mythology. Rothko's art was profoundly loaded with emotional meaning that he conveyed via a spectrum of forms that moved from figurative to abstract and was heavily influenced by Greek mythology, Nietzsche, and his Russian Jewish origin. Very important. Like, can you read that in the work? Not necessarily. Is that cultural context? It is indeed. It is indeed. This is what's influencing the artist. And finally, it's interesting to learn he was an art teacher from 29 to 52, and he liked the unfiltered responses to art making, which helped him capture the essence of emotion and form in his own work. He loved how free and open children made art, and this had an impact on his work. That's cultural significance. Okay, now what we're going to do is I'm going to show you exactly how you make your slides, right? I've just broken it down and sort of taken us into the research with only one or two of the possible avenues in. Let's look at our friend, the 3rd of May, which I showed you when we did analysis of formal qualities. And I would start with what's happening in the wider world. Like, this is a big event. This looks like a political unrest. It looks like a war, right? That's what I immediately see. So that's where I'd start. And so this, as you see in the bottom left, a sample of a finished context slide. And I'm going to show you that this piece is so significant that I needed 2 slides. And I think the examiner would call into question if I made this one and stopped, and you'll see why. So I've read a lot to you. I'll let you read this yourself, but you can see that first paragraph gives you an overview of his career when he was painting, what his work was like, and how it developed and changed over time. And you can read that yourself. But now I need to get into what's happening here. And so the last sentence, he went from jolly, lighthearted pieces, right, to more significant works. And the French occupation in 1808 set the stage for this seminal work. Well, what was that? So now I take you, and the blue arrows take you through it, the French occupation of Spain. So the Peninsular War, here are the dates. Bonaparte was on the throne. He was asserting his power across Europe, and he marched into Spain and deposed the king and put his brother, Napoleon's brother, he put on the throne. Follow the blue arrow. So the Spanish Rebellion. But the people staged an uprising on the 2nd of May against the French occupation, and launching the War of Independence. And Goya captured this event as well in a companion piece, follow the blue arrow, called the 3rd of May. There it is. It's called the 2nd of May. Typo. Sorry, guys. The 2nd of May. So you go over and you can see another painting by Francisco Goya of the actual uprising. Now we go to the bottom. In retribution, the French then take a series of innocent people from Madrid. They take them outside the city and shoot them, brutally murdering them. Okay, I have now given the examiner a sense of what was going on in the larger world. I have a little bit about the artist world and then the larger world. But this piece is so significant that my research told me I can't get all of this on one slide. I'm going to go to a second. Do you have to do 2 slides for each one? Absolutely not. If you go to my sample of my whole comparative study on a few other artists that I was interested in, I did a whole one from start to finish. You will see that I did not use 2 slides for cultural significance. But if you pick this piece, you're going to need to. If you pick the Sistine Chapel, you'll probably need to, okay? And if you don't, the examiner will go, okay, well, she got some of it, but she didn't get it all. So here's my second slide, and you'll see why I did it. So the painting has been lauded. First of all, I throw in here that it was actually commissioned by the Spanish government. Okay, so one of the reasons it was made. This painting has been lauded for its brilliant transformation of Christian iconography. If I didn't talk about this in my cultural significance slide, I'd lose points. And anybody that knows the work well, and these are art teachers and art historians looking at your work, will know this. Because it's a poignant portrayal of man's inhumanity, and the central figure, clearly a poor laborer, takes the place of a kind of crucified Christ, right? See the arms outstretched, the lantern bathing it in what would be perceived as kind of a spiritual light. And if you look very closely, here's my detail with an arrow, there's actually reveals holes in the hands, representing how Christ was nailed to the cross. I should also talk about its legacy because it was such an important work, and so I do that briefly. Future artists also admired the 3rd of May. Both Manet and Picasso used it for inspiration in their own portrayals of political murders, and you can surely see the connection there in the execution of Emperor Maximilian by Manet. I go on to finish by saying the 3rd of May of 1808 remains one of the most chilling images ever created of the atrocities of war. And then I tell the examiner, I was fortunate to view this piece in person while on a field trip to Spain. I found its size and luminescence riveting. I felt the horror of this moment in history as if I was witnessing firsthand. I could truly see why this piece was considered a masterpiece. So both of these slides would be finished context slides. You can look at these when you set up your own. The last couple of slides, just if you were in the room with me, I'd ask the class, where would you start? And most students raise their hands and say the artist's world. And we learn to do that. Why? Because it's a self-portrait. And not only is it a self-portrait, but something's going on, right? Look, he's got a bandaged ear. Of course, it's famous. We all know about the famous bandaged ear. But what's going on, right? In his world, that's where I would start. Now, I would also go into Impressionism. I would go into the artist's world as well. The larger world, not nearly as significant. He was living alone in an asylum. He and his brother, he only communicated with his brother. So there'd be very little bit about the larger world, but I'd have plenty of stuff to research about his world and about the art world at the time. Let's look at this one. Where would you start? Well, this looks like sort of a high fashion. It was called a Paris street on a rainy day, and people are parading around. So definitely the artist's world, and maybe the greater world, like what's going on in society at this time. And I could probably do some research on the art world. I don't know whether this is a typical of a genre of the time or whether his work is unique in this style and the way he's painted the city street. But I think the artist's world and the wider world are probably where I would start. And then finally, this is Guernica by Picasso. This is all about the attack on this town by the Nazis. And this is another seminal work of art. And you would find lots of stuff about how he felt, the artist world, how he felt affected by the attack on this town, the art world, because this is a huge and major and significant example of Cubism, and considered one of the most significant pieces on Cubism, and of course the wider world. It's a direct reaction to Nazis' devastating casual bombing of this Basque town during the Spanish Civil War. This would probably take 2 slides to really dig into. Okay, I thank you for your patience in listening to this rather long explanation, but it's really important that you understand how to do it. I don't want you spinning your wheels, so I really beat a dead horse here with this long, complicated presentation. Please follow my lead. Use this presentation, go look at the questions, find the work, and start entering it in the most logical way. Look at the questions and answer them by researching. And if you do that, your cultural significant slides will come together quite easily. And of course, I won't be out that long. I'll be in and I can begin to sit down with you and see how you're doing and offer help. You're going to ask when they're due, and I was remiss because this is all laid out on my desk with due dates and calendar with a note to enter this into my NA right after giving this presentation, and here I am at home. And I didn't memorize when it's due. I think I'm giving you about a week to do this work, and of course class time. Don't hold me to that, but I think that's where I landed. And when I get into school, I'll immediately put the due date on my NA. Thank you for listening, and good luck with it.